Freire described the theory of liberation as a process that, once set in motion by the oppressed, will have a profound liberation and healing impact on the oppressor, as well as those victimized by various forms of cultural oppression and social political injustices. In essence, theories of psychological liberation and cultural hybridity represent a transformation of consciousness among oppressed persons. Realization of this liberated consciousness results in the understanding that, by remaining oppressed, persons in marginalized cultural groups help to perpetuate an insane and dehumanizing dance of psychological and spiritual suffering that adversely affects the oppressor as well as the oppressed persons. In our digital essay, we will explain the concepts of cultural hybridity and liberation separately and give examples for both. We will also provide a conclusion that links the two together through examples from our world today.
In our own words, cultural hybridism is how some societies manage to merge various aspects of cultures, customs, and beliefs in order to create a diverse environment in which people are able to thrive and coexist with each other.
Examples of cultural hybridism can be found in academia and in the community. The City of Calgary has prioritized cultural diversity because they believe that the expression of individuality through the arts, culture, and recreation are vital to an active lifestyle. They work to make Calgary recreations, arts, and culture events and services accessible and inclusive of people from many different backgrounds. Cultural hybridism is also being brought into the Canadian education systems through Indigenous teacher training programs at a variety of universities and schools across the country. Brian McKinley Jones' Brave Boy talks about the importance of cultural hybridism in education when he writes that Indigenous ways of knowing and book smarts can be blended to create more meaningful knowledge and change. Another example of practical cultural hybridization is in Joseph Couture's reflection on the Nishi Institute, which established all Indigenous addictions treatment centers. The ability to merge Indigenous healing methods and Western counseling proved to be very effective in healing from addiction. For me, it is important to bring cultural hybridization into Western academia. In my research essays, I try to bring myself and my experiences into the conversation because my voice is worthy to be heard, even alongside accomplished scholars. Personal narratives have a place in academia because they are just as important as objective research. The two can exist in harmony and mutual respect. Two people who are examples of cultural hybridization to me are author Cherie Dimaline and PhD candidate and poet Billy Ray Bilcourt. Dimaline presented her acceptance speech for the Governor General's Award in Young Adult Fiction in Anishinaabe-Moin, and Bilcourt brings personal narratives into his elevated scholarly work often.
As someone who was born in Mexico and lived there for 12 years and continuously keeps on visiting the country, I have learned that the Mexican culture itself is very hybridized with many other cultures. Another example of cultural hybridism is how the Spanish language in Mexico has evolved to merge some of the Spanish words with Nahuatl words in order to create everyday use words, such as zacate, which means grass, guarache, which means sandals. And then we have words such as chocolate, which is also derived from the Nahuatl language. Nahuatl was the language the Aztecs spoke, and it has evolved to become one of the languages of many indigenous populations in Mexico.
By definition, liberation psychology aims to free all people from the enslavement of distorted aspects of their inner lives and from the binding yoke of injustices experienced in their lives within the community. In our words, liberation is when individuals come together to change certain social structures in order to allow positive change and connections among people. The ability to see past internalized oppression and recognize the systems that create oppression can help to free Indigenous and settler populations from harmful ways of thinking and being. This constitutes healing for both communities.
Orange Shirt Day allows everyone as a whole to hear the voices and stories of those who went through the injustice of residential schools. These individuals are survivors. Therefore, having Orange Shirt Day allows everyone to see the healing journey, and it also serves as another step towards reconciliation, as well as honoring the children who did not survive residential schools. Another example of liberation for our indigenous populations are certain activities such as drum and circles and poa dances. It is important to acknowledge this example, as we are aware that the Canadian government once forbade indigenous communities from engaging in these activities.
For me, the general education courses and electives I've taken throughout university have helped me to recognize the many systems of oppression in our world that negatively affect Indigenous peoples, immigrants, women, and people with varying levels of physical and mental ability, among others. The process of conscientization has enabled me to think critically about my place in the world as an able-bodied woman settler. It has also allowed me to begin learning about other ways of knowing and how I can bring them into my academic work and life.
My personal connection to liberation is being able to live in a first world country, as well as getting an education here. Back in my home country, women who get an education and speak their minds are often heavily judged because they tend to think outside the box. Therefore, for me to be able to be here and share my thoughts and knowledge is a form of liberation. By bringing forward education and acceptance to the oppressed and the oppressors, individuals will learn to coexist in their environments in a way which will benefit everyone. As Freire 1917 explains, allowing this to occur will have a healing impact on the population. Some examples of how this has begun to change in the West is the merging of Indigenous and Western knowledge within Canadian educational institutions, as well as the incorporation of spiritual ways of healing during counseling and/or therapy sessions for Indigenous peers. It is also important to acknowledge the seventh fire prophecy, which states that the people, meaning both the Indigenous and colonial people, will look back to the old ways and begin a healing journey together instead of walking separate paths.